Welcome back to another episode of the Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Lauren Conlon, and this week I'm joined by Coach Karina.
Hi, guys.
And we are going to do a podcast all on fat loss supplements that actually work. So, drum roll, please.
They don't. Just kidding. Unless it's a drug. Fat loss
Ozempic, and end of story.
Fat loss supplements don't work outside, typically, of you already, doing the best you can with a proper diet and exercise. Again, unless it's a drug, Ozempic. A lot of these fat loss supplements are typically never going to be more efficacious than you following a diet that will put you in a caloric deficit or exercise enough so that you're in a caloric deficit as well. And so when it comes to what fat loss supplements actually work, a lot of the studies on fat loss supplements are typically in populations who are already part of some sort of exercise program or some sort of diet study. There are a few supplement studies that are done in just sedentary populations. A lot of those studies are done in disease states such as type 2 diabetes or other metabolic syndrome contexts. So if you are a healthy person listening to this, the answer to you is no fat loss supplements work. The old saying still reigns true. There is no magic pill for losing weight. It is always going to come down to you being diligent with your nutrition and your training and your cardio for whatever your goal is. Can these supplements help you? Again, the definition, can they supplement your regimen if you are a competitor or someone who is just trying to slim down for an event? Sure, but they will never be more efficacious than you actually being diligent with a training and nutrition protocol.
I feel like a lot of the products that help are more like indirect, right?
Correct.
Like they're like indirectly helping. And it's so hard because I find that a lot of clients almost immediately are like, hey, if we're starting a fat loss phase, like I want to get the most out of this, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. What's going to be the best thing? And I would say I'm like normally like outside of like the major ones that we recommend like for just kind of health all the time, a lot of the ones that can help with fat loss are going to be like notice how I said can, because there's a small effect and they usually are more indirect. And that can be really frustrating to people, right? Because it's like outside of, again, something like an Ozempic or even a metformin, but metformin isn't directly related to fat loss. Mm-hmm. It's blood sugar regulation, which a lot of the studies point to like those products working, right? And that can, again, indirectly help, but it's not something that is like this immediate thing or like take this and all of your fat loss efforts are like rewarded.
Correct.
I would say there's probably more research on performance-based supplements than fat loss supplements, right? Like there's some things that are like pretty well established in the performance literature, which is nice, which again is kind of an indirect thing. If we increase training performance, we can indirectly change body composition. So it's not that that's like not important. It's just a little bit different.
Yeah. For example, 3 supplements that have the largest body of evidence that I'm aware of behind them are protein, creatine, caffeine. We know that there are plenty of studies that, that are in agreement of, protein can help build muscle and recover. Creatine can help with increasing muscle mass, power. There's also a lot of, brain or cognitive health benefits with creatine. And then caffeine, enhancing performance, alertness, etc. A lot of the fat loss supplements that I see advertised in the market today, their main ingredient is typically like caffeine or 5-HTP, which are 2 perfect examples as to how they could indirectly help supplement a fat loss phase, because all caffeine does is increase lipolysis, but it doesn't always end in the end goal with fat loss is fat oxidation. So to take those outside of science terms, you have a fat molecule that exists in your adipocyte or fat cells that has to break apart, and that is called lipolysis. Caffeine is what essentially activates that process. But those fatty acids that used to be a triglyceride that is now breaking into fatty acids, those can very easily circulate in the bloodstream and come back and turn back into a triglyceride or fat molecule within the adipose cell. What actually burns those fatty acids is the deficit, is the caloric deficit, is the exercise. So caffeine can help break apart those fatty molecules for you to essentially use them as energy. But if you're not in a deficit and you're not training and your diet isn't on point, that caffeine pill won't help you lose the weight you're trying to lose. So that's a perfect example of an indirect way that a weight loss supplement whose main ingredient is caffeine can help you lose weight. Another more popular one I think I see is 5-HTP, which has been shown to help reduce appetite. Again, that's just helping you maintain a caloric deficit. But what is actually going to help you lose weight? The caloric deficit. If you're eating less, obviously, if you're not hungry, it's going to be easier to maintain a caloric deficit.
And we know that just by and large from our own selves, but also coaching, like there's not one factor that is more indicative of if someone is going to be adherent or not than hunger. Like hunger is the main driver of why I find that clients cannot stick to a plan, which is why if you are going to look at any kind of fat loss agent, if they do have an appetite suppressant in them, that is why it's really helpful to be in there. And on top of that, having the caffeine boost, like people enjoy that kind of like little bit of a boost. And there's just kind of that like subconscious thought of if there is this boost and I have more energy, then like it's working, right? And of course, having that caffeine boost when you are in a deficit can be really helpful because we have to manufacture energy somewhere. And if we don't have as much energy from calories, using caffeine can certainly be helpful. It doesn't feel the same, as we both know, you know what I mean? But it is a alternative. So I do think that you can leverage it and you can then time sources, in terms of having your caffeine and making sure you are doing, cardio or training bout, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think that overall it's going to be a small difference. And that's also where we see things like, okay, yes, like, is it going to help a little bit or is it going to help a lot? And I think that as long as we're realistic with how much it's going to help, that's useful. But to be fair, I think on a population level, right, is it hard to say like this is really useful if someone only lost a pound or two? But if someone, if one of our clients is working really hard and then they add these things in and they lose another pound or two and it helps them, and it makes it like easier to manage, then I'm like all for it, right? Like, so there's certain things that it's like, I think we have to also take the person into consideration. And of course, like that's what we do like with coaching. And even though 2 pounds might not seem super meaningful, 2 extra pounds on top of what they're already doing, like that could help. But it is really hard to tease out just in terms of the evidence, how much of this is from the deficit, how much of this is from like the product, and especially when we're talking about any kind of fat loss, like any kind of fat loss product that is most likely going to have caffeine, it's going to be really hard to do like any kind of like placebo work with that, because people are going to be like, hello, I'm definitely taking, like, I know what group I'm in, what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
there's also then the reason the placebo group matters, it doesn't matter that someone knows they're taking caffeine, right? Like, but it can matter, like physiologically it doesn't matter, but psychologically, if they now have this like placebo effect from it, right, that could certainly be driving behavior, which is hard to then tease out. If you're in a, placebo study, double-blind placebo study where you're taking a fat loss agent and you clearly realize that you're taking something that has a few hundred mgs of caffeine in it, right? While physiologically, like, yes, those results are going to be the same, you then also have this psychological thing where you're like, oh, I am taking the fat loss agent. Like, maybe I should stay a little bit more dialed in with my diet. And like, maybe I should do this. And whereas maybe if you were in the other group and you didn't feel it, then you're kind of like, oh, I didn't get in that group. Like, maybe it doesn't really matter. Like, maybe I shouldn't be as dialed in. Like, there's all these like little minor differences. Like, that's what we were talking about on our last podcast, how it's so much harder to like work with people versus animals, because like when you're working with people, like all of those factors are into consideration. Yeah. And that makes it really messy.
Yeah. And luckily, again, like caffeine is a supplement that has a lot of evidence that agrees with its effects. whereas, it has been shown to be statistically significant against placebo. It is not the same for other supplements that don't have that kind of physiological effect that we can almost immediately feel.
5-HTP works on serotonin, right? Is that okay?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Serotonin to help suppress appetite. Another supplement that I see, I feel like in the more popular fat loss or weight loss supplement space is chromium picolinate. A lot of that, I feel like a lot of the claims are based off of a very old study. There are a few really compelling studies, but that were published in like the late 1990s. But since then, there have been studies published in like 2010 through 2016 that would essentially refute what was published in the early 1990s. So that space is a little confusing with that supplement just because there are, again, older studies that make a strong case for them, but then there are newer studies that have tried to replicate something similar or even at higher dosages that were done in the 1990s that show the complete opposite or no effect at all. And so that space is kind of confusing because it's like, okay, what do we trust? Like, where are the discrepancies? There's just, conflicting evidence. So if I were to make a decision about chromium picolinate, I would say I don't really know because there is evidence that is for it. There's evidence that is against it. I would probably lean on the evidence against it because the evidence for it is older and we don't know the protocols and the ethics that were going on back then compared to, what people are able to tease out now. So that's kind of another one that's conflicting. It's
popular, but maybe not, maybe they should be an updated opinion on that one. And then
aware of.
So in that line with the blood sugar regulation, so that I would say is probably outside of caffeine and outside of appetite. I would say that the other biggest piece for fat loss, again, indirectly, but would be something with blood sugar regulation, right? And a lot of people will, talk about berberine as a really, really common, people call it like a GDA, glucose disposal agent, or just really anything like within GDA type products. So what is the current consensus, if there is one, on berberine and its effectiveness on blood sugar regulation and everything with that?
Most of the evidence that I have seen shows that berberine can be quite effective at 1,000+ milligrams per dose. And one of the most compelling studies that I think a lot of people will point to is that there's a study that exists where berberine is compared to metformin, and the results between the two are not statistically significant, implying that berberine can be as effective as a drug. Now, that's a strong claim, right? Not saying that. But
listen to our last podcast. Karina is not going to say that.
I'm not going to say that. That's not allowed. But so I think a lot of people in the research space would advocate for berberine being something that has a good amount of evidence. But again, research is very nuanced. That study is not placebo controlled, but a lot of people will make the case for, well, it's compared against a drug, but you can't imply that a single ingredient is as efficacious as a drug. And so, maybe that study hasn't been picked apart to see perhaps there were some errors, maybe there was consumer bias, I don't know, or not consumer bias, but bias in general. But from at least when I was doing my master's degree, I do believe that there was a lot of agreement around, wow, berberine is efficacious. We see berberine in a lot of GDAs that are on the market today. But again, when it comes to fat loss, the mechanism is indirect. Berberine can help reduce blood glucose or quote unquote, support healthy levels of blood glucose. Postprandial blood glucose effects can kind of help keep it a little bit lower. And the indirect cause for fat loss with that is if your blood glucose is low enough, your body will then kind of get kicked into the processes it needs to for burning fat.
And then if you're in a calorie deficit, you could go back to presumably burning more fat, which then would help continue that process. And that was actually one of the things that my last coach, Cliff Wilson, talked about as a during a contest prep using a GDA, which kind of went against what I originally thought about it, because I'm just thinking, okay, we're using this for large carb boluses. And, if we're in an off-season phase in particular, right, we're trying to maximize still being, insulin sensitive, and I'll use a GDA with a higher carb protocols. That makes sense. But then when he recommended it for that, I was like, this is so interesting. And it was, again, like kind of this indirect pathway of potentially, again, lowering blood glucose. So then you're getting back to fat burning faster. The only thing that, and we use that pretty effectively, and I really enjoyed that. The only thing I will say with GDA products in general, and I don't know if berberine is driving this, or if other products are driving this, or if it's just kind of a combination, but if you don't have enough carbs with it, it can make you feel hypoglycemic, right? Like if it's strong enough, you know what I mean? Like it will do that, which that it's working. But if you are in a severe calorie deficit and it's not something like, if I went hypoglycemic right now, it would be okay because I have enough body fat to support that. And I could also just go eat something and it would be the end of that. In a contest prep, you don't really have that luxury. You know what I mean? So I would say that for people who are listening, who are in a diet phase and they're interested in trying something like a GDA product, I would just start with, the recommended dose. Don't just be like, let me just pump out just a ton, right? Mm-hmm. Let me just take 2,000 mgs of berberine because I heard 1,000 is good, right? Yeah. And even most GDAs have about 500, I find. Mm-hmm. So that might be enough for you. That might even be too much, right? Or you might,
A lot of them recommend that you take a pill twice daily. So that'll be, or 3 times, which is over. But yeah.
So just kind of see, because if you are going hypo, and then if going hypo causes you to overeat, well, now we've negated all of the positive effects of what this could be doing, you know? Yeah. So it's one of those things that I find is very client dependent, and some people just have a higher threshold to those things than others. So just kind of like a practical tip, if you are interested in exploring that, just start slow, and then see, kind of how you feel. And another one too, again, kind of an indirect mechanism could be something with, stress reduction, right? Because again, if somebody is just pumping out, cortisol all day, they're very, very stressed, they're inflamed, their body presumably wouldn't want to drop body fat quite as well. So is there anything in that area that you found to be helpful in terms of evidence, and what has been shown to help with stress reduction, and what has actually been shown not to, or if there is anything like that?
So, I think a big one that a lot of people know about is ashwagandha. Sorry. Any adaptogen that has been shown to reduce stress, can help with a lot of things. But again, it's another indirect cause that could potentially, I think you could lower stress and take all the ashwagandha you need to reduce cortisol. But I feel like from what I have seen, cortisol will not be as much of a hindrance as like high blood sugar or low movement. But again, it is another tool in the box that we recommend for all of our clients. You should manage stress, because people who can manage stress tend to have healthier blood sugar levels and, circulatory, blood circulation levels. And that will ultimately help with body composition, recovery, sleep, which, all of this is connected to body composition and weight loss goals.
And just health in general. If someone is chronically, stressed out, they're really going to struggle with really any facet of a goal setting process, or just feeling better in general, right? Even if it has nothing to do with body comp. A lot of people come to us because they're like, I just want to feel better.
Right.
And let me tell you, if you're chronically stressed and not managing that, you're not going to feel great,
Well, oftentimes dieting itself is stressful. So it's okay, if you're already so stressed and now you want to reduce your calories and train more than you have time for, then you're just going to continue to it's likely not going to be as successful. So sometimes for the clients who come to us who want to lose weight and think they need to reduce their calories and train 3 times more a week, maybe you just need to learn how to manage your stress. And essentially, sometimes the inability to manage stress manifests itself in overeating or not moving enough. And so start at the low hanging fruit, manage your stress, cut out the unnecessary things that are causing you stress. And I think that will essentially change your behaviors to eating better, to moving more. And then hopefully you won't need supplements, because again, the most important thing is going to be lifestyle, diet, activity levels. Supplements are there to just supplement any efforts that you already have going on.
Absolutely. And I think that there's also something to be said about when someone is first starting something, right? And let's say they are really overwhelmed. And I've kind of changed my position on this over time, right? Like gone back and forth, like, how do I feel about this, right? But let's say someone does start taking like something like ashwagandha or any kind of adaptogen product, and they do start to feel better. And because they're feeling better, whether that is actual effect or a placebo or a combination, if they start feeling better and then they start doing the other things, right? Like they start creating those other habits, then I'm happy that they've done it, right? And then maybe they can come off of that product, or maybe it's kind of a staple for them because it has helped. So I think there's a lot of ways to look at that. But I do think that the perception needs to shift a little bit from, especially the way that ashwagandha has been marketed. Not like, it's not ashwagandha's fault. It's just the way that like it's become almost like a meme of itself, like you can't just like pop ashwagandha and then just be like, fine, you know what I mean? Like that's just like not how it works. And if that's your intention behind it, it's just not going to happen. Yeah. But I think if you are looking at it as like, hey, this could be something that like kickstarts me, and like this is going to be like a part of my like healthy new regimen, I think that even again, if it's placebo or not, I say like go for it. But I think that our expectation really has to be in line with what some of the realities are, and I think that goes for all fat loss, air quotes, supplements, right? Like it's a lot of these, like every single one that we've talked about has been pretty indirect. And I think that it is important to know that even something that would increase, like if caffeine just increases like your physical movement, like that's still indirect, you know what I mean? But because you're physically moving more, that could possibly help, free up those free fatty acids, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that it all can be in a really nice cohesion with one another. But I think that we should first and foremost focus on how do we create an ecosystem that is going to be supporting all of these different domains, supplements included potentially, but also what are some of the other things that we can do? And like I said, low-hanging fruit. Like if people are wanting to start fat loss supplements, but they aren't willing to like hit 10,000 steps a day, hey,
hey, what you doing?
we got a conversation, right? Like if you're hitting 3,000 steps a day and you're wondering why you're not like losing fat, right? It's like, well, for the majority of people being that sedentary, on average, again, we all have sloth days. Like, listen, I get it. And there's nothing against that. And this is not to say you need to be obsessive about hitting 10,000 steps, but it's overwhelmingly apparent that being more active on a consistent basis is more in line with our body's just like evolutionary paths and just like how our biology and physiology optimally respond. Like we were just not meant to not do that. So we were meant to move and do things. And that again doesn't mean that you need to be, get a walking pad after you get off of this call and circle the block because you haven't hit it and, like do all this stuff. But in general, people are really going to struggle if they're really sedentary, because just most people don't want to eat that little.
Right.
And like, because you could technically be really sedentary, but in order to be in a calorie deficit, it would be a really, really harsh deficit. And then I also just find in general that people feel better when they do more. And that also has an appetite reduction. There's a curve, right? Too little movement and too much movement will both create increased appetite, I feel like. But there's like that happy sweet spot that if we are moving a little bit more, it does seem to help with appetite regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a good amount of evidence to support that too. And like, you also don't want to, move so little that you can't eat enough to get like the essential nutrients that you need too.
Exactly.
Like,
because that's not healthy either.
Yeah. So, it's just a double whammy of like unhealthy. Like, don't starve yourself and not move, or don't not move because you don't want to eat, or, etc. Just move.
Yeah. We want everybody to be as like holistically healthy as possible. Yeah. And that is going to come from all the different facets that we always talk about.
Run clubs are all the rage these days. It's a fun way to be active and meet new people.
It is. I don't meet anybody because I'm like, we're going to get ice cream. So I like can't breathe and I'm just like, yogging around Bayshore.
Join your local run club.
No, but it is good. And I do love that people are
they're so trendy these days.
They really seem to be. Like there's like a whole thing of people just like picking up running again. And I think it's interesting because I think it's probably because a lot of people around our age group and this is just my hypotheses, but a lot of them in the fitness space maybe used running as a way to like, you know, lose weight. And a lot of people had like a negative connotation with running in the sense of like, I have to do this. Like I have to go to 5 spin classes so I burn enough calories.
Right.
But I feel like there's like this interesting new resurgence of running where people are just like, this is like fun. And I'm doing this because it's fun, not because like I hate myself. You know what I mean? Like in that, you know, and there's a huge difference of how that feels to our body when we are emotionally like approaching it in that way.
Yeah, I have a friend who's doing research on this right now. Like how you perceive activity will essentially dictate how adherent you are, like how, like your longevity in the activity, which, I think run clubs are fun. It's a good way to get outside. It's a good way to meet people. I also feel like it's also kind of like the result of the rubber band effect of like COVID. You know, when we were all like stuck inside and like isolated, like run clubs are like, let's all get together and run outside with 300 people. Like,
the in-person training modalities, whether that's like run club or, you know, group fitness classes or even having a personal trainer, CrossFit, like all of that has exponentially increased because now so many people are working from home. That they are now like, let me go do things in person. And this is just like a really interesting trend that I've been seeing and, you know, talking with different professionals in the space. And so I just feel like I've been, you know, trying to share this with anyone. Like if you are doing in-person stuff, like it seems like people are wanting that more. Yeah. So,
I mean, I think, you know, we're called to be in community. And I think what is so like addicting for some people with the CrossFit space is obviously not only improving like your skill, but like you form a family with the people that you see in a gym every day, like being kind of on like a team sport. It's very different than I think like the put your head down bodybuilding style, which for some people like that's great, and like there's also a community within that. But I think like run clubs are so great because it just like creates that community, and like I think what people want at the end of the day is to feel like they're part of a community.
Yeah, but think about even with bodybuilding, like how many people have training partners, right?
Yeah,
that in the bodybuilding community,
it's way more fun.
It's very common for someone to just talk about having a training partner, like as just like having like a partner in their life, you know, like me and my training partner, we're here, me and my training partner, and it's like it's such like an interesting dynamic. Yeah. But it really is like such a thing because especially people who are competitive, they're pushing super hard, and it's just like nice to have someone there. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely. The resurgence of all of that is happening, I think, also just largely because people are so burnt out with their just like phones and like being online and like just doing so much in terms of like now everything is virtual, you know, like when they used to like, again, be in an office, go and like, you know, maybe travel for work. Like people are still doing that now, of course, like, but it's just a lot different.
People are craving that community again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think this was really great, and hopefully you guys have a better understanding now of some fat loss supplement do's and don'ts. And I know we talked about this a little bit last time, but once again, shout out to examine.com, not sponsored. If you guys want to sponsor the show, you can.
That would be so cool.
That would be pretty rad, not gonna lie. So hey, anyone from Examine, call us, but definitely check them out if you are interested in looking at maybe any of the supplements that we talked about today. And even just, you could like probably just type in like fat loss supplements, and I'm sure there'd be a bunch of different things that come up there. So you could check out what seems to be appropriate for you. And really, again, just think of it in terms of those pillars, like in the indirect way, right? Not just for fat loss, you know, blood sugar regulation, stress reduction. Those are going to be some things that will really help with you being an appetite regulation. Those are going to be kind of the areas that you're going to want to look for, because again, like direct fat loss supplements, not really a ton out there that are not necessarily, you know, drug related.
Correct.
So anything else to add?
No.
Okay.
Join your local run club.
Yeah. Shout out to run clubs all across the world. We hope you guys enjoyed this episode. For all other inquiries about coaching or consulting or to apply to work with Karina or myself, you can visit redefinehealthybrands.com. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot us a message, and we'll talk to you guys next week.